What comes to mind when I say invasive species? It probably depends on where you live, but rats are a common one. So are cats. Any organism can be invasive, from the smallest insect to the largest tree. But across the world, some seem to be especially good at it. Today, I want to do something a little different to my standard format and look at invasive species. I talk about them a lot in my videos, as they are a conservation concern for many endangered species. But what are they? What traits make an organism good at being invasive? And why are they such a problem worldwide? If you'd like to learn more, check out the document in the description with research papers and image credits. So, what exactly is an invasive species? Just because an animal or plant is introduced, meaning it originated from elsewhere, doesn't automatically make it invasive. To count as invasive, it also has to cause harm. That harm might be ecological, outcompeting native species or altering habitats, or it might be economic or social, disrupting farming, fisheries, or even human health. But here's the tricky part. How much harm is enough? And how do we measure it? These questions don't have straightforward answers. In fact, the definition is deliberately vague, because invasiveness often depends on the context. Even the idea of native can be complicated. Take horses, for example. Their ancestors first evolved in North America before spreading into Eurasia and then going extinct back in their homeland. When Europeans reintroduced horses to the Americas in the 1400s, were they restoring a native species or introducing a foreign one? Ecologists still debate this question, so I certainly can't provide the answer, but it does make you wonder. What we can say is that invasive species cause real, tangible problems. Rats wiping out seabird colonies on islands. The brown tree snake in Guam, which has driven almost every native forest bird to extinction. These are invasives in the clearest sense of the word. But many other cases are less clear-cut. Take the European honeybee, introduced widely to pollinate crops. In some places, it competes with native pollinators, but it also provides important ecological and economic benefits. Originally seen as beneficial, in New Zealand there is evidence that honeybees have contributed to declines in some native bee species and negatively affected the plants they pollinate. Another example is the European starling in North America, introduced deliberately in the 1800s. Starlings compete with native birds for nesting sites, and in some areas they have displaced cavity nesting species, but in many human-altered landscapes, they coexist without triggering ecosystem collapse. Cases like these show that invasiveness isn't always black and white. It often depends on context, perspective, and the scale of impact. But not every newcomer causes problems. Some species establish without major harm, and we call these naturalized species. A good example is the silvereye in New Zealand. This small songbird wasn't brought here by people at all. Instead, flocks were blown across from Australia during storms in the 1800s. They survived, bred, and spread across the country. Today, they're one of the most familiar garden birds. Technically, they're introduced, but they've slotted into the ecosystem without major disruption, and most people treat them as if they were native. There are plenty of other examples worldwide. Ring-necked pheasants in North America were introduced from Asia for hunting and are now widespread. Fallow deer, first brought to Europe from the Middle East by the Romans, are long accepted as part of European landscapes. And mute swans, iconic in British lakes and rivers, were originally native to Central Eurasia before being spread across Europe by people. These cases raise a difficult question. When does an introduced species stop being alien and start being considered part of the environment? Don't forget, migrations to new areas have happened throughout prehistory, especially when land bridges connected continents. I mentioned horses before, but another striking case is camels and llamas. Today, we think of camels as Asian and llamas as South American, aside from the feral populations in Australia. Yet, both groups actually evolved in North America. From there, their ancestors dispersed. Camels crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Asia, and llamas moved south across the Isthmus of Panama. In their homeland, however, they went extinct. Because humans never encountered them in North America, we don't associate them with that continent at all. This shows how much our sense of what belongs is shaped by perception and history, as much as biology. That ties into the idea of shifting baselines. Each generation grows up with a different version of normal nature. Over time, we accept altered ecosystems as natural, even when they've been heavily reshaped by introductions. Of course, not all introductions slot in so neatly. Some species take off, spreading rapidly, overwhelming ecosystems, and earning the title of invasive. So, what makes a species good at invading? The short answer is adaptability. For animals, that means being omnivorous, or at least flexible in diet, allowing them to survive on whatever food is available. Rapid reproduction also helps. Producing lots of offspring quickly allows a small population to expand dramatically. Some even bring pathogens with them, giving them an extra advantage by harming native competitors. Mice and rats are classic examples. They are omnivores, eating anything from insects, lizards, and birds' eggs to seeds and grasses. They also breed extremely fast, so once they reach a new land, they become extremely difficult to stop. Goats are another example. Hardy and adaptable, they can eat almost any vegetation, causing problems in many parts of the world. Pathogens can also play a role. The American grey squirrel, introduced to the UK, brought with it the squirrelpox virus. Grey squirrels are naturally resistant, but native red squirrels are highly susceptible, leading to dramatic population declines and giving the invader a distinct advantage. For plants, the invasion recipe looks a little different. Fast growth gives them a head start over slower natives. Effective seed dispersal allows rapid colonization, and chemical or physical defenses, like toxins or thorns, make them unpalatable to herbivores. For example, you could look at the kudzu, a vine originating in East Asia that is now in the United States. It is extremely fast growing and smothers native plants by shading them out. Or Japanese knotweed, also from East Asia, but now spreading through Europe. It is not only fast growing, but spreads using rhizomes, an extensive underground root system that makes them nearly impossible to eradicate once they've become established. The prickly pear cactus from the Americas can now be found in Australia, where it was causing havoc. It not only spreads rapidly, but forms dense thickets protected by formidable spines. None of the Australian herbivores could eat it, so it was spreading unchecked, at least until a natural predator was deliberately introduced to control it in the form of the cactus moth. It is impossible before an organism is introduced to say whether a species will become a problematic invasive. However, the most successful invaders share adaptability, rapid reproduction, and the ability to thrive in a wide range of conditions. Traits that allow them to outcompete local fauna or flora and establish in new environments. This adaptability also sets the stage for the next key factor, the role humans play in moving organisms around the world, whether intentionally or accidentally. Today, the world is more interconnected than ever before. Thousands of aeroplanes take to the skies every day. Boats sail to even the remotest corners of the world. And on every vessel, a potential stowaway, ready to wreak havoc in an unsuspecting land. This may seem far-fetched, but it has happened before. The most famous examples are the rats, which travelled with people on ships for centuries. Three species in particular have spread across the globe: the ship, Norway, and Polynesian rats. Between them, they have decimated seabird colonies, wiped out island specialists, and driven countless plants and invertebrates to extinction. Rats remain some of the most damaging invasive animals on the planet. Of course, not all human introductions were accidental. Many were deliberate, and one reason in particular may surprise you: homesickness. When people migrated to new parts of the world, they often wanted to make unfamiliar landscapes feel more like home. Have you ever wondered why New Zealand and Australia have European starlings, thrushes, and blackbirds? New Zealand even has hedgehogs, small, familiar in Europe, but here they have become highly destructive, feeding on native insects and other invertebrates and disrupting ecosystems. Settlers formed acclimatization societies, groups dedicated to introducing familiar animals and plants into their new environment. These societies released everything from trout to finches and planted willows, oaks, and poplars, reshaping local landscapes to resemble Europe. Food and commercial gain were the other major reasons for species introductions. Pigs, goats, and deer were transported across oceans and released to provide a reliable source of meat. Fish and shellfish were introduced into lakes and rivers for the same purpose, while fruit trees and crops were moved across the globe. Take the humble potato, for example, a staple in many cultures worldwide, and often associated with Ireland because of the potato famine in the 1800s, but originally from the highlands of Peru. Like many crops and domestic animals, These species thrived far from their original ranges, sometimes outcompeting local plants or altering ecosystems. Humans also introduced species purely for economic purposes. In Argentina, beavers were brought from North America in the 1940s to establish a fur trade. Without natural predators, they quickly spread across southern forests, felling thousands of trees and altering waterways. In New Zealand, possums were introduced from Australia for the fur trade, but now cause massive damage to native forests and birds. These examples show how commercial motives have had long-lasting ecological consequences. Then, there were attempts at biological control, bringing one species in to solve a problem caused by another. This can be very successful. I have already mentioned the cactus moth being introduced to Australia to control the prickly pear cactus. But when it fails, it can go spectacularly wrong. Around 100 cane toads were introduced into Australia in the 1930s to control beetles that were damaging sugarcane crops. The trouble was, the beetles often stayed high up on the plants, out of the toads' reach. So the toads didn't fix the problem at all. Instead, they began spreading across northern Australia, and their biggest impact wasn't what they ate. It was that almost nothing in Australia could safely eat them. Cane toads secrete powerful toxins that kill predators like quolls, goannas, snakes, and even crocodiles. With no natural checks, their populations exploded. Interestingly, not all predators have been helpless. In some parts of Australia, corvids, the crows and ravens, have learned to flip the toads onto their backs, picking out the non-toxic organs and avoiding the poison glands. Corvids are famed for their intelligence, no doubt letting them adapt faster than most other animals. Still, it shows that sometimes native species can adapt to new invaders, but usually not fast enough to prevent widespread damage. The pet trade has also been a major pathway. Cats, for instance, were carried around the world by humans as companions and rodent control, but on islands they have become devastating predators, driving dozens of bird and reptile species extinct. More recently, the exotic pet trade has introduced everything from reptiles to ornamental fish into places they don't belong, sometimes with dramatic ecological consequences when unwanted pets are released or escape. Goldfish are one you might not think of, originally from China, but once released into ponds or rivers, they can grow far larger than the tiny pets in bowls, stirring up sediments, uprooting plants, and outcompeting native fish. In all of these cases, humans are the vector. Whether by accident or design, the story is usually the same. Once a species arrives, its success depends on adaptability, growth rate, tolerance, and its ability to outcompete whatever life is already there. Some ecosystems are especially vulnerable, and we'll see just how this plays out when we look at islands and other hotspots for invasives. Nowhere are the impacts of invasive species felt more strongly than on islands. Island ecosystems often evolve in isolation for millions of years, with few or no large predators and limited competition. The result is incredible biodiversity, but also incredible vulnerability. Many island animals never develop defenses against predators, or lost defenses they once had, because they don't need them. Birds nest on the ground or lose the ability to fly entirely. Plants grow without thorns or toxins. When a new predator or competitor arrives, they're completely unprepared. Rats provide one of the clearest examples. Throughout the Pacific, they have devastated seabird colonies. Ground nesting birds that once covered entire islands have been wiped out, leaving only silent cliffs and empty burrows. In New Zealand, rats, along with stoats and cats, nearly drove the nocturnal flightless kakapo to extinction. Now it exists only on predator-free offshore islands. And it is not the only one, even just from New Zealand. The ancient tuatara shared a very similar fate. Other islands tell equally stark stories. In Hawaii, mosquitoes carrying avian malaria have decimated native honey creepers, many of which were already restricted to high-altitude refuges. Point to the island, and you can guarantee invasives drove something on it extinct. The Guam kingfisher, the St. Kilda house mouse, the Christmas Island pipistrelle. You really don't have to look hard to find examples. In Guam, the brown tree snake, likely accidentally introduced after World War II, has caused a near-total collapse of the island's forest bird populations. Native songbirds and pigeons that once filled the trees are gone, altering the structure of entire forests. Similarly, on the Galapagos Islands, goats introduced by sailors in the 1800s devastated vegetation on several islands, outcompeting native plants and creating erosion problems. Only through large-scale eradication campaigns have some of these ecosystems begun to recover. Islands are also prone to a compounding effect. Invasives can arrive in waves, each with new species benefiting from changes caused by the previous one. For example, rats reduce seabird populations, which lower nutrient input from guano, weakening plant communities. That, in turn, can make it easier for introduced plants to establish, which may then provide food for yet more invasives. The isolation that makes islands such cradles of unique evolution is also what makes them so fragile. When invasives arrive, they often spread unchecked, and the native species simply can't adapt fast enough. It's no coincidence that many recorded extinctions in recent centuries have happened on islands. While islands are certainly vulnerable, some mainland ecosystems also act as hotbeds for invasives. Certain climates and environmental conditions make it easier for newcomers to survive, spread, and sometimes dominate. Take the Florida Everglades, for example. Its subtropical wetlands are now home to Burmese pythons, iguanas, and numerous invasive fish and plants, many introduced through the pet trade. Some were likely released deliberately when people no longer wanted their exotic pets, but the problem exploded after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which destroyed a Burmese python breeding facility and released hundreds of snakes into the wild. In the warm, wet, prey-rich Everglades, these snakes thrived. Today, in areas where they are established, natives like raccoons, rabbits, and opossums have declined by over 90%. Climate and habitat similarity between regions can also make invasions more likely. New Zealand provides a striking example. Several species from Chile have successfully established here, including the Chilean flame creeper, Chilean rhubarb, and Chilean needlegrass. The temperate oceanic climates are remarkably similar, allowing plants and animals to settle in as if they were in their native environment. This pattern repeats worldwide. Mediterranean climate regions, for example, tend to share invaders. Species from California can thrive in Chile, South Africa, and southern Australia, and vice versa. In subtropical and tropical regions, similar overlaps create opportunities for species to colonize new areas rapidly, as we saw in Florida. In short, invasives succeed not just because of their own traits or human assistance, but because some environments are especially welcoming. Where conditions match their needs, establishment and spread become far more likely. Invasive species are more than local nuisances, they are a global issue. Ecologically, they're one of the leading drivers of biodiversity loss. When invasive predators, competitors, or pathogens enter a new ecosystem, they can push native species toward extinction, especially those already restricted to small ranges or specialized habitats. Whether we are talking about islands or wetlands, the result is often the same. The ecological impact is usually the one I focus on, but it's not the only issue. Invasives also impose enormous economic costs. Agricultural pests, invasive weeds, and introduced pathogens can devastate livestock, crops, and fisheries. Others damage infrastructure, from plants clogging waterways to insects boring into wooden structures. Altogether, the global bill for invasive species runs into billions of dollars every year. And the impacts don't stop there. Human health can be affected too. Mosquitoes introduced to new regions spread diseases like malaria or dengue. Rodents carry pathogens that can jump to humans. So can bats, thought to be the original source of the virus behind the COVID-19 pandemic. Even some plants release allergens or toxins that affect local populations. Put together, invasive species are a multifaceted problem. They don't just compete with native wildlife, they reshape ecosystems, threaten food security, and affect human communities worldwide. Can we control invasive species? The short answer is sometimes, but it's rarely easy. Once an invasive species becomes established, removing it completely is an enormous challenge. Some of the most successful efforts take place on islands, where ecosystems are contained. New Zealand is a world leader here, having eradicated invasive predators from more than 110 offshore islands. Building on this success, the country has set its most ambitious goal yet, Predator-Free 2050, aiming to remove possums, stoats, and rats nationwide. But while New Zealand may be small on the global stage, its mainland is vastly larger than any successful eradication project to date. The scale of the challenge is unprecedented. One example that highlights both the cost and the difficulty of eradication: the $1 million mouse. This project targeted the subantarctic Antipodes Islands, where mice were devastating native insects, lizards, and seabirds. Mice are notoriously tough to eradicate due to their size and rapid reproduction. The Antipodes remote location added another layer of complexity. Yet, after 5 years and 3.9 million New Zealand dollars, the islands were declared mouse-free in 2018. It was a remarkable achievement, but also a reminder that even small islands demand immense resources. And this brings us to the central problem with controlling invasives. Total eradication is possible, but it is usually slow, expensive, and difficult, and on large landmasses, often unrealistic. New Zealand is pioneering new technologies to scale up predator control, but these approaches take time, funding, and often spark controversy. Poisons, for instance, remain widely used but hotly debated. They risk harming non-target species and often cause suffering. Scientists are working to identify and develop poisons that are more humane and species-specific, but real-world solutions are rarely so tidy. Then there are the emerging genetic tools, such as gene drives. These involve altering the genome of a species so that engineered traits, such as infertility or skewed sex ratios, spread through the population, driving numbers down over generations. Modeling suggests that introducing just 256 gene-edited mice into a population of 200,000 could wipe it out within 25 years, without poisons or traps. Yet such tools raise deep ethical questions. Are we comfortable playing God? What if engineered animals escape and spread to other populations, even globally? Would we risk wiping out an entire species to protect an ecosystem? If eradication is costly and controversial, what works better? At least that answer is simple: prevention. Stopping invasives before they arrive is vastly more effective than trying to remove them later. That means strict biosecurity, inspecting cargo, controlling ballast water, monitoring trade in live plants and animals. Countries like New Zealand and Australia invest heavily in these measures, recognizing them as the first and best line of defense. Without safeguards, species can leap continents. Zebra mussels, for example, hitched a ride in ballast water from Europe to the Great Lakes in Canada. They spread explosively, clogging pipes and outcompeting native mussels, a problem that remains hugely costly decades later. Ultimately, controlling invasives requires persistence, ingenuity, and long-term planning. Successes like the Antipodes Islands prove that eradication is possible, but prevention remains the most powerful tool we have. Invasive species aren't just bad aliens in our ecosystem. They are a reminder of how connected our world has become and how delicate ecological balances can be. We've seen that defining invasives isn't always straightforward. Not every newcomer is harmful. Some, like the silvereye in New Zealand, become naturalized, quietly fitting into their new homes. Others, with the right combination of traits, adaptability, rapid reproduction, and broad diets, can spread rapidly and outcompete native species. Humans play a central role, whether through deliberate introductions, accidental transport, or global trade. Islands show us the stakes clearly. Unique species like the kakapo, Hawaiian honeycreepers, and the Guam kingfisher are pushed to the brink when invasives arrive. But even mainland ecosystems can be vulnerable, from Florida's Everglades to temperate regions like New Zealand, where climate and habitat similarity allow new species to establish quickly. The consequences are global: biodiversity loss, economic costs, and threats to human health. Yet, the story is not all doom and gloom. With persistence, careful planning, and innovation, we can manage invasives. Efforts like New Zealand's Predator-Free 2050, the Antipodes $1 million mouse eradication, and strict biosecurity measures show that prevention and targeted control work. Lessons from species like the zebra mussel or the brown tree snake remind us why vigilance is crucial. But controlling invasives also raises difficult ethical questions. When we eradicate goats or poison rats to protect endangered birds, we're deciding whose survival matters. New technologies like gene drives promise powerful solutions, but they force us to ask, how far should we go in reshaping life? These choices aren't easy, yet they underline the depth of our responsibility. Ultimately, understanding invasives isn't just about protecting wildlife. It's about recognizing the intricate web of connections between humans, introduced species, and ecosystems. and the responsibility we carry to maintain that balance. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into invasive species. Despite my efforts to keep the topic global, I realise many of the examples come from New Zealand. At the end of the day, it's where I live, so I followed the old adage, write what you know. But I'd love to hear about your own experiences with invasives in the comments below. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.